Welcome, everyone, to this very special podcast interview with the wonderful Dr. Alec Miller. My name is Maya Metzer. I graduated from NYU last May with my bachelor's in applied psychology. And I'm also the founder of the Psych podcast, which helps psychology students all over the country to discover and navigate careers in and around psychology through interviews with leaders just like Dr. Miller. I started this initiative because I myself wanted to learn from all the amazing people in the field who are using psychology to make an impact in very diverse ways. So whether that was in clinical psychology or business or medicine or academia or the public sector or law or health, really, the list goes on. I wanted to discover what psychology had to offer through speaking directly with industry leaders who could offer their insight and help increase access to critical information about careers in psychology to students everywhere. Now, before it was a podcast, it was a live event series for several months, and I loved doing that because I was able to hear questions from my audience in real time. So when I met Alec, we got to talking and decided that we wanted to bring back the live format and do this podcast interview in front of an audience. And I was so on board because Alec is just such an incredible person and clinician to learn from for anyone interested in the clinical field, but honestly, just as a human. So it'll become very clear to you very soon why I'm so excited to be doing this. So we're doing this live because we want to give you all a chance to ask questions. So I have collected questions ahead of time, so lots of you have sent them in. But if questions come up as me and Alec are conversing, feel free to send them in the Q&A sort of chat box at the bottom. I'll try to get to as many as I can and incorporate them, thematically throughout the interview. And if there's any that we don't get to at the end, Alec and I will try to cover those. So feel free to do that. And then let me just introduce the wonderful Dr. Alec Miller. He is, of course, a clinical psychologist, but he's also a teacher, a researcher, an author, and a disseminator of evidence-based treatments all over the world. He is the co-founder and co-director of Cognitive and Behavioral Consultants, a private group practice in Manhattan and White Plains in New York. He is also a clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx. He's an expert in the treatment of stress management, adolescent depression, suicide and self-injury, and borderline personality disorder, as well as dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. We'll get into why that's important in a bit. But Dr. Miller has co-authored 4 books, more than 100 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters. He's conducted over 1,000 lectures and workshops worldwide, and he's trained thousands of mental health professionals. He started a nonprofit foundation, and he's earned numerous awards and honors for his clinical, scientific, and service contributions. Alec, it is such an honor and a privilege to be learning from you today. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Maya, it's my pleasure to be here with you. And I'm so excited. I'm so impressed with what you've done with your Psych podcast. And I'm really excited to get to talk with such a diverse group of undergrads, grads, and postgrads. So this is fun, yes. Really fun for me, really fun.
So fun. Yes, I am so excited. Somebody just asked if the recording will be posted and where it will be posted on my podcast. So anywhere you access podcasts, Psych is there, and you'll be able to access it in the next couple weeks. All right. So Alec, let's get started. I would love to start with your beginnings in psychology. How did you become interested in this field?
Well, it's a great question. Everyone has their interesting story. My backstory started as a young boy where my father was a psychiatrist. My mother was an occupational therapist. And there was a lot of talk around the dinner table about health and mental health. And when I turned 17, my father sat me down with my sister and said that you have to tell us something very serious and kind of a important family secret that they hadn't told us previously. And what that was that my grandfather, so my father's father, who had worked at Gimbel's department store, basically he got fired from his job back in the 1930s. About 1950. And when he was fired, he went home and sadly hanged himself. He died by suicide.
Mm.
And this was a mind-blowing newsflash, because my father had told me that his father died from a heart attack. So we had all those years, and from a young boy until 17 years of age, that was the assumption. But then I found out there was a suicide in my family. And so not only did I have a family of parents who were kind of health oriented, but when I went to college at the University of Michigan and having this knowledge of my grandfather dying by suicide, I got fascinated by it. I was interested in psychology to begin with, but I then became more interested even in how and why people die by suicide and how to prevent it. So I studied psychology, and opportunities arose. When I went to graduate school, I was very interested in working with teenagers. And then when I graduated from, and I may be going too far too fast, but when I graduated, when I graduated from graduate school, an opportunity arose to direct a clinic for suicidal teenagers. And so it kind of became full circle, finding meaning in this tragedy, my family tragedy, where I wanted to kind of really subspecialize in studying suicide and studying suicidal adolescents and how to treat them. So I know we'll come back to that.
Wow. Did you have experience in, by the way, you went to the University of Michigan for your undergrad and you did your bachelor's in psychology there. And by the way, I believe there are several audience members today who go to UMich. So
all right.
Go blue, I guess, right?
Blue. Absolutely. Go blue. Yes.
Someone just messaged, go blue. So I would love to explore a little bit about, lots of audience members were curious about the things that you did in undergrad to help prepare you for graduate school. And actually, was graduate school even on your radar in undergrad?
Well, after I gave up my dream of being a first baseman for the New York Yankees, I thought maybe I'd be a musician. And I realized I was too pragmatic and practical and maybe not talented enough in the combination to realize I might not be a professional musician. And I saw the lifestyle my piano teacher in high school led, which was a tough life as a professional musician. So I kind of started feeling more strongly as I went through college that I really wanted to think about a career in mental health. But so in all fairness, I thought about psychiatry. My father was a psychiatrist. And back in those days, in the Stone Ages, many years ago, he was doing a lot of therapy. And even though he had a prescription pad and he could write scripts for all kinds of psychotropic medications, he did a lot of therapy. So my image of a psychiatrist was being a psychotherapist. But as I went to college, and my father being well aware of what the field was trending toward, he said, son, if you want to be a psychotherapist, psychiatry may not be for you, because it's turning much more into biological psychiatry and a lot more about pharmacotherapy and less about therapy for psychiatrists. So he was the one who encouraged me to look into clinical psychology as a next step. So that was an interesting bit of feedback from him on that.
But you knew you wanted to practice clinically.
Absolutely.
How did you know? How did you know you didn't want, I mean, I know you still do research and research has been a big part of your career, but how did you know that clinical work was going to be right for you?
Growing up, even as a youngster, loving to help people as a kind of athletic coach or mentor, as a musical teacher, as a hosting parties for people where I did magic. I love being with people. I love helping people. I love listening to people and trying to understand better, what makes them tick. So I always had this kind of like these non-specific inherent interests in this area. And then I guess in college, even in high school, I had how many of us have had friends who say, would love to talk to us for hours about their life problems, and we got engaged by it and kind of wanted to lend support. So it was just natural, instinctual for me. And then, like I said, my father telling me at age 17 what was going on, I really piqued my interest and curiosity and how people tick. And once I had my intro psych class at the University of Michigan, again, go blue, I was really enthralled with, psychopathology and understanding more about the clinical realm of things in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And I think what you've just said resonates with so many people who are considering clinical work or who have already embarked on that career. But we just got a question from someone in the audience, Lauren, who asks, or maybe it's not even Lauren. I don't know because the names may have gotten a little jumbled up. But they ask, what if you love doing all those things, but you don't know if you'll be able to handle doing that every day?
It's a really good question. I don't think you know until you do it. I mean, I used to have, when I first started as a trainee, I had one patient in the graduate school clinic or two patients. I used to have to take a nap. I was so exhausted. Wow, it was such a heavy emotional load. And I'm not even kidding. I felt really tired and mentally drained. And I said, wow, this is really tough. But in some ways, like everything else, you build a tolerance. And I don't mean a detached, uncaring tolerance, but a tolerance to kind of have stamina to handle more emotional
Hmm.
load, handle a more emotional pain, and learn how to not take it home. And I think most people that I've trained with and I train now learn ways of doing that, but you don't know until you try. And I'm sure there are some people for whom it is too much. They may just be too emotionally sensitive. They don't develop enough tolerance or thick enough skin to withstand a heavy clinical load. But then you can diversify, and we'll talk about this, how you can kind of
Hmm.
be a clinician part of the week, the day, and then do other non-clinically related things where you're not seeing patients all day long. And we'll talk
Right.
about that.
Right. Yes, we will. We'll come back to that. Thank you for those insights. You did mention, yes,
Can I add one more thing, Maya?
of
Just
course.
going back to high school and in beginning of college, my mother, who was an occupational therapist, had the idea of me volunteering in my college summers at New York Hospital in White Plains. And what I did, and this is again for those of you who are interested in terms of earlier, in your college years, is can you volunteer your time? And I worked in the activities department, working with people who were coming from the inpatient unit, and I get to play sports with them. I did other recreational and occupational therapy activities, arts and crafts, and music and athletics, and it was such an interesting window into seeing patients with schizophrenia and bipolar illness and people who were severely depressed and multiple personality disorder, they called it back then. And so I got such exposure, and I was 18 or 19 years old, and it also reaffirmed my interest and passion in
Mm,
wanting to do more, because I felt slightly, one hand tied behind my back. I didn't know exactly what to say and do. I did what I seemed natural, but I knew it was insufficient in terms of my impact on helping these patients with
mm,
their lives.
mm.
So I did that several summers, and it was really interesting and exciting.
Yeah, you're touching on something that probably 20% of the pre-submitted questions surrounded how to gain the right experience
Hmm.
before you apply to graduate school in clinical psychology. Number
Hmm.
one, to help you figure out if you're good at it and want to do it. And number two, so that, it looks good on your application.
Right.
Many students are concerned that, with just a bachelor's or as an undergrad, you're not really qualified for much.
Yeah.
And so, Alec, what advice do you have for students who are looking to gain that experience?
My advice to people looking for that type of experience and building up their resume, and also, as you say, to figure out whether this is the right field for them, is to do a couple of things. Number one, related to what I just said, you could volunteer or serve as what we call a mental health worker or mental health tech, where you could be a college student working in the summers or after hours on weekends, working on, especially on inpatient units. It's an easy way to get, exposure to patients who are struggling with mental health problems of all kinds. And so get some clinical experience that way is what one major bit of advice I'd like to give everybody right now,
Hmm.
because that does look good when you apply to graduate schools. They want to see you've seen patients, you've interacted with patients, and hopefully you'll have a letter from somebody, could be the medical director or a lead supervisor on the unit, saying Maya is just naturally gifted in working with patients with severe mental illness and so on and so forth,
Hmm.
and what you did. And so that's number one. And I think many college kids I've known, I've given advice to, have done that, and it's benefited them. Secondarily, and depending on your level of interest, but even if you're not interested in a career of research, having some opportunity to get involved in some research studies in college and undergrad, either through the university or through some offsite opportunities. So, for example, one of your friends, Joy, we were blessed to be introduced to her, and she, as an undergrad, did a research assistantship and continues on even now, even though she's in graduate school, with our group called Cognitive and Behavioral Consultants. And so she has multiple presentations, and hopefully will have publications that derive from that work. That she's participated in.
Yeah. Okay. Such valuable information. You've touched on research just now, and I got a lot of questions about that, particularly around the importance of doing research, and how important it is in the actual degree, depending on whether you go the PsyD route or the PhD route. And I know you went the PsyD route. We'll touch on the research portion. Before we do, can you just talk about why you chose that route?
It's a great question. It's a little embarrassing to admit. I was an undergrad at the University of Michigan, having a good old time. And this is back, in the 80s. I really didn't have an idea that a PsyD degree even existed. It was earlier in its infancy as a degree. Very few schools had it. So I applied to Yeshiva University for their PhD program. I went for the interview, not knowing that a PsyD existed. And they heard about my interest. They said, Alec, you sound like you're much more or better fit for the PsyD program. And I said, excuse me, what are you talking about? Well, the PsyD program is for people who have more of a clinical bent and maybe less interested in this moment in doing more active research. I said, sure, I didn't know it existed. So I literally serendipitously fell into it. They put me in the PsyD applicant pool generously, and then I got accepted there. And I actually am really happy with most of the reasons why I did that. And I'll tell
you
the caveat. So, now PsyDs are much more prevalent. PsyD programs, especially university PsyD programs, I'm partial to, because they have a strong faculty, and the teacher-student ratio is usually more manageable. I feel like some PsyD programs that are not university-based can become almost factories not all of them, but some of them, where the number of students is so large and there's less individual attention paid. But to your audience members now, here's my thought on this. If you are really interested in getting good training in psychotherapy, there are both PsyD and PhD programs that offer great training in psychotherapy. There are some PhD programs that you think, okay, well, I'm going to do a lot of research, that may do a lot of research and are very narrowly banded. So, for example, I don't want to name names, but there are certain, in my role as internship director for the child track at Montefiore for 20 years, I got to see a lot of applicants from graduate school programs. There were some really good PhD programs, like highly ranked. Those students had a very narrow banded clinical experience, let's say really good for just child anxiety. But they didn't see a broader range of psychopathology during their graduate years, because the rest of their time was all research.
Right.
And the clinical work was on the research studies. And so while they were smart and capable, they were actually less competitive in my opinion, for a place like Montefiore, because I needed people who could handle depressed suicidality, disordered eating, impulse discontrol problems, and so on. And I was worried that they didn't have any exposure by the time they showed up to internship. Now, that being said, Maya, there are plenty of PhD programs I'm not doing endorsements today, but there are plenty of PhD programs that do ensure that the students get more clinical experience and exposure and breadth, while at the same time doing research and a dissertation that may not be as time consuming and occupying so much of their bandwidth. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And every program is different. And so I think a lot of students are, here, PhDs are for academicians and researchers, and PsyDs are for purely clinicians. And the line is not that
Not as
clear. Yeah.
exactly.
So,
So
every program has a different emphasis, right?
indeed, and there's some of the local PsyD programs in the New York region. Some of those folks are, like you said, really intent on just being clinician, but there are some who actually go on to do careers in research. That was not my initial intent. As I told you, I wasn't planning to be a researcher. I only wanted to do research once I wanted to figure out, is what I'm doing helping anybody? Is this new DBT treatment we'll talk about helping anyone? Then I'm like, I need to do some research to
Right.
evaluate that. But even PsyD program folks can do dissertations. So I was blessed to have a mentor at one of my externship sites who agreed to allow me to do hospital-based research that became my dissertation that led to publication. So, even as a graduate student, I was able to get engaged in research, and I got excited by some of that there as well. So don't feel, like you said, Maya, that you're pegged in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. So you were able to do research in a PsyD program, so that exists.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, somebody asked why you chose the PsyD route if you were still enjoying research, but that actually came later, right?
Came later.
Yeah. And yeah, as you said, you're not pigeonholing yourself. There are opportunities to get involved in research even after the fact, as you've demonstrated. Somebody asked if doing internships and participating in research labs are the best way to have a better chance at getting into grad programs, or are there other ways?
Yeah, I think exactly what you said. Like, getting involved with some kind of field work, whether that be a volunteer experience in your summers during college, whether it be taking a gap year. A lot of folks I know these days, as the graduate schools are getting more and more competitive, may take a year or two after college and work full time. As I mentioned, maybe doing a mental health work position in a hospital, and definitely, like I said, getting involved in research studies where you might do just research, or you might get involved in being participating in some clinical research where you're running subjects in some way and getting to interact with patients, even if you're not doing therapy per se.
Okay.
So I would encourage people to kind of look at those two routes. And could you get involved in writing and presenting with mentors? Absolutely. And that looks really good if you apply to grad schools and you have presentations as posters or part of other, papers that come out of that.
Right. I've received a lot of questions about the differences between programs. We've touched on that. But for programs that train clinicians, there's so many ways to go. There's the clinical psych, PsyD, there's the clinical psych PhD, there's the counseling PsyD, the counseling PhD, there's the clinical social work, there's the master's in counseling. I mean, my God, there's so many different routes to go.
Yes.
Someone asked, how do you decide?
You rattled off a lot, Maya. One of that you didn't mention is the clinical school child
Yes.
program and the health clinical programs, right?
Yeah.
So there's an unbelievable array. It's a really tough question. Maybe that if you're not sure where to begin, taking a year or two after college to kind of do some exploration, working with younger people, like I said, on a child adolescent inpatient unit, for example, or getting other research in that area might be helpful. You have to do a lot of mindfulness to kind of figure that out. When I went to graduate school, I wasn't definitively clear I was going to work with adolescents. I mean, so I went the clinical route, and that I felt like gave me the greatest, broadest training. Then I can kind of, subspecialize later. But the truth is, when I applied to one of my second externship, my first one was at Columbia, working with adults with severe and persistent mental illness in a day program. My second externship, I applied to because I wanted to do some adolescent work. And the guy said, "Sorry, Alec, you don't have any experience." I said, "Well, this is why I'm applying. I want to get experience. How do I get experience as a graduate student?" So that felt very painfully disappointing. And then I ended up working at Bronx Children's Psychiatric Center, which was an incredibly great training opportunity, inpatient adolescents. So you have to be persistent, you have to be creative, you have to be flexible, you have to be patient. But I do think if you're not sure, I think a clinical is great, and then you can subspecialize afterwards in health or in child. The challenge is if you're really interested in schools, you got to do a school program so you can get the school certification.
Okay. I feel like I could ask you a million questions on this, but we will move on a little bit. At the end, if there are more questions about this, I'll try to read them off, in the last sort of 15 minutes. So where was I? Oh, yes. A lot of students wonder, what is graduate school actually like? And, before you apply, it's going to be helpful to know what is the next, 5 to 7 years going to look like for me. What did it look like for you? What did you spend time doing? What was fulfilling about it? What was challenging about it?
Yeah, again, I felt fairly naive coming straight from college, not really having anybody that I knew who was doing a graduate degree in psychology. So I was kind of somewhat naive going into it. I ended up the first year living at home in New York just so I could save some money. I worked part-time at various jobs. And then I went to classes like a college student. I was almost like a commuter student, and it felt, not that different from college, but then it occurred to me, well, actually, this is a little different than college, and this is going to be my career. This is not just going to be some, classes I'm going to attend. I really have to learn this stuff. I have to commit myself. So I definitely felt a certain sense of greater gravity about this. This is serious. And then, I started doing some testing of patients in year one, some like psychological evaluations and learning how to interview people. And then year two, I said, I started doing some externship opportunities at some clinical settings. And here I am. I was 23 years old, like working with people 2 or 3 times my age, feeling all self-conscious about that. It was a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Do I really know what I'm doing here? And a little insecure, to be honest, right? And then as the years went on, and I started doing a variety of work with, underserved folks in Bronx Children's, and I love the racially diverse populations at Montefiore and some research studies I was doing with the psychopharmacology study called the Xanax slow release trial. And I was running subjects there, and the patients that didn't respond, I started doing cognitive behavioral therapy with my supervisor. I wasn't trained. I was, but he was teaching me how to do it on the spot. Graduate school was really a range of so much interesting stuff. And then I eventually moved out and started living with a roommate and having a more young adult life. So it took a few years to get there.
So you started out with a psychodynamic focus, which for those who aren't familiar with the idea of picking a theoretical orientation, actually, Alec, why don't you give us a little rundown about what that is and why it's important?
Yeah. So, as a graduate student at Yeshiva, where I went to school, the primary focus and theoretical orientation was a psychodynamic approach. And that really has a lot more to do with historical antecedents of why people act the way they act now is based on how they grew up, and unconscious conflicts and interpersonal dynamics, and much more historical impact on present. And I got to tell you, I really enjoyed that foundational training and learning, Kernbergian approaches and interpersonal approaches, cohesion, a variety of Winnicott, and all kinds of interesting theoretical frames, including Freud. But what really spoke to me in graduate school was the behavioral therapies and then the cognitive behavioral therapies. I didn't even know DBT existed at that time. It wasn't, Linehan's book wasn't published when I started graduate school, but I was really excited about doing the practical, skills-based, here and now, short-term. You have panic disorder with agoraphobia, and I can give you 12 sessions and you're good to go. Oh, I'm like a magician. That felt so incredible.
Magic.
How can I, versus the Woody Allen stereotype of being on the couch 4 days a week for 25 years. It didn't feel very gratifying to visualize that. Now, of course, there are shorter term psychodynamic psychotherapies and people have good outcomes, but I was excited about the evidence base that went along with CBT. And I'll talk about how I got into DBT whenever you're ready. But I guess there were a few courses that I took, and then I got this job at Montefiore as a grad student doing the Xanax study where I did the patients who didn't respond. We gave CBT to, and I could just see what the non-responders to medication responded to some brief group CBT, and I'm like, this is really impactful, and we can really see outcomes in a rapid pace. So that really shifted my mindset, and it spoke to me in a different kind of way.
You started speaking about my next question, which was about what settings you enjoyed working in the most in graduate school. If there's anything you want to add to that.
Well, I really loved every setting, frankly. I really did enjoy them. The Bronx Children's experience, working on this acute adolescent inpatient unit with really interesting psychopathology with some really kids and families who are really struggling. I love that. And that's where I did my dissertation with that group. And in those days, inpatient wasn't 2 or 3, 5 days. It was 2 to 3 weeks minimum, and then maybe a couple of months. So those days, you had a chance to actually get to know your patients and see change. Unfortunately, these days, with managed care and a lot of other insurance pressures, the average length of stay for many inpatient units is 3 to 5 days. So
yeah, not very long at all.
Acute stabilization and out. So my first job after grad school was an inpatient unit up at Four Winds Hospital, where the average length of stay was weeks to months. And I enjoyed it until I got an invitation to run an outpatient clinic for depressed and suicidal teenagers. And that was a light bulb moment for me, where I could really first I was scared to death because I'm now the director of an outpatient clinic for suicidal youth. And then the residents and interns, I was like, only a year and a half out of grad school. They're like, okay, Dr. Miller, you're the director. What do we do? And I said, let me get back to you on that. It was like, I don't know what we're going to do. I have some basic ideas, but what does the research say? And there was no research that had been done to establish any effective treatments for suicidal teenagers. And that's when we said, we gotta figure this out. My colleague, Jill Rathis, was the research director. I was the clinical director. And we said, let's put our heads together, let's talk to the people who are doing evidence-based treatments in the field. It says everyone excluded suicidal kids from the research. They didn't allow them to participate. So
because of, liability concerns or ethics. Yeah.
All of the above. And so then we heard about this adult treatment called DBT with suicidal adults. Someone said, why don't you talk to Marsha Linehan? And we said, wow. And then that was the beginning of the next chapter of my life.
Wow. It's time to talk about DBT. So just so we know on the timeline, how long after grad school are we talking right now?
So it was a year and a half. So I graduated, I took the job at Four Winds Hospital where I worked on this inpatient unit for a year and a half. And then this opportunity arose where I got invited to go back, where I was an intern at Montefiore 2 years earlier, go back. And now, do you want to run and co-direct this adolescent depression and suicide program? And it was such a dream.
Why do you think, we'll get to DBT in a sec, but my God, why do you think they hired you? Not to say that you weren't competent, but you were so young and so fresh out of grad school.
Indeed. We have to do a mental status exam on the person who offered me the job, I guess. but the truth be told, I think they knew I loved my work with adolescents. They knew I loved evidence-based treatment. And that clinic was not that at the time. It was already the person who was leaving had been running it in a more psychodynamic and supportive psychotherapy kind of way. And they wanted someone who could maybe do short-term treatments with this this challenging population. And I was so ecstatic about the opportunity. I feel so blessed to have been given that opportunity.
Wow. So let's talk about DBT, because it's such a huge part of your practice and your career. First, it's, I'm not going to assume everybody knows what it is. I actually didn't know until much later in my college career. DBT stands for Dialectical Behavior Therapy. Could you give us a rundown about what it is? Also, what's the dialectical piece of it? What does that mean? And what does it use to treat?
So this genius by the name of Marsha Linehan, who had her own mental health struggles in her youth, and this is public knowledge. She had been hospitalized at the Institute for Living, had been depressed and suicidal and self-injurious, really struggled in her own life, and literally developed this miraculous psychotherapy called dialectical behavior therapy. And she, as she, became an adult and went to graduate school herself, she started doing what was at the time cognitive behavioral therapy with suicidal adults. That's who she chose to work with. And the patients who she worked with felt like invalidated by the therapist, Dr. Linehan. It's like, you tell me to change. Cognitive behavioral therapy is changing cognitions, changing behaviors. And she said, so I want you to do this. I want you to think this. I want to do this. And they said, you understand, I'm 45, 50 years old. I have a longstanding mental health problems. I've lost my children in child protection. I have heroin addiction. And you're just telling me to change. That doesn't work so easily. You don't get it. They felt like she didn't really understand their pain. And so she realized, being the astute clinician that she was, that straight CBT for this population, many of whom turned out to have borderline personality disorder, was not effective. So she said, okay, let me try something else. Let me approach this from an acceptance point of view, where I'm going to validate their pain, help them accept themselves better, and see change is hard, life is difficult. She really leaned in on validation and acceptance. And at first, the patients are like, great, Dr. Linehan, you understand my pain. Yes, life is hard, Maya. Change is difficult, right? Very acceptance hard. And then at a certain point, they said, it's great you understand my pain, but what the heck am I supposed to do with it? Can't keep telling me you understand. I need some tools, for crying out loud. And then the epiphany happened. What if she blended the change strategies of cognitive behavioral therapy with the acceptance strategies that she took from Eastern meditation and mindfulness practices and her Western contemplative practices, and blending them into one synthesis of dialectical means? Two seemingly opposite truths can coexist at the same time and almost create a superordinate truth. So, for example, Maya, you're doing the best you can in this moment, running this webinar and asking great questions and engaging with the audience and engage with me. And at the same time, maybe there's other ways of facilitating some of the online questions better for next time. So you're doing the best you can and need to do better. And I, as your friendly neighborhood interviewee, I'm doing the best I can, participating, answering questions. And I realized in hindsight, there were a few things I could have tweaked differently and answered the questions even more clearly 5 minutes ago. And I'm accepting that. So I'm doing the best I can and need to do better. And so dialectical behavior therapy is a lot about acceptance and change, helping our patients accept and push for change. And there's a whole skills package, a whole skills curriculum that Linehan developed for adults that we've later adapted for adolescents. That includes mindfulness skills and distress tolerance skills, interpersonal effectiveness skills, and emotion regulation skills. And it's a broad, comprehensive skills approach to life. So it's multimodal too. So the last thing I'm going to say about this, I could go on for hours, as you can imagine.
I know.
DBT is once a week individual therapy, once a week skills training group, skills coaching during the week. So if you're distressed, Maya, you could call me for coaching after hours so I can help you avert the crisis and not make the situation worse. And then weekly therapist consultation team meeting where we support each other in the process. So it's multimodal as well.
Why do you think it works so well for depression and suicidality?
As I said to you earlier, just in terms of my affinity for different therapies, and I love different therapy. I love the earlier therapies I learned, but this one spoke to me at a whole other personal level, like that you really, in a profound way, can communicate, and how to teach therapists how to validate someone else's pain is so important. And she created a behavioral way to teach therapists on how to effectively validate patients. Like, we understand the construct of letting the other person know you understand what they're going through, but she trains people in this and different levels of validation. So that is so therapeutic. And she broke down good psychotherapies and integrated them to make them much more teachable. So I think that's a piece of it. And the patients feel understood, and they also are getting real concrete tools on what to do. So what brought the treatment together for her, I think, is what's so appealing to patients. She herself was a patient. Her therapies weren't working. She basically created one, I'm sure, that worked for her, but also worked for other people in this brilliant way. And she's now ranked one of the top 100 scientists in the past century based on her impact.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. I could go on and on waxing about this poetically for a while, but I mean, those are some of the factors that I think are important. And the one other factor is the group. You are with other individuals who are struggling in similar ways and learning together, supporting each other. And some of you know Yalen's work about universality of groups and learning, hey, we're in this together. And it's not just individual therapy. And I think that's a secret ingredient to the success of the program, is there's a built-in supports in the process.
Wow. Somebody asked, I was going to ask this later, but I think it fits in well now, given that you just shared that Dr. Linehan, shared her own personal struggle with borderline personality disorder. And this person asked, do you think our field is ready to challenge stigma by sharing our personal stories, such as Marcia Linehan has done? So I think they mean clinicians. Do you think our field is ready for clinicians to share those stories?
I'd like to think so. And I'm still a little bit anxious about it. I knew when I took over this outpatient clinic in the Bronx, and I just shared with everyone my own family history about my grandfather dying by suicide, that I would tell people that even though my father didn't tell any colleagues early in his career about his situation, about his own father dying by suicide, and maybe felt too close and too painful emotionally for him to communicate it. So I think it depends on your own ability to kind of communicate in a way where you're regulated, describing what it is, either a family member or yourself, that you've dealt with and how you've managed to overcome it. And I think, I also think celebrities have done a really good job getting out there and trying to destigmatize mental health problems, whether it be Lady Gaga, Selena Gomez, an old friend of mine, Brandon Marshall, who is a retired NFL football player. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and then he'd go into schools and he'd talk about his mental disorders to a bunch of high school kids. And then before you know it, one kid's like, I got OCD, I have depression, I have eating disorder. And he made it acceptable when I was with him in a way that, not everyone can do. But whether a clinician, in their early career is able to come out and start saying that they have borderline personality disorder is an interesting question. Marcia waited to much later in her career because she herself was worried it would kind of stigmatize her and not get grants and be perceived as having a mental illness that was not under control.
Right.
So my hope is that for those of you who are listening and wondering, I've certainly had people interview and told me either at interview or during their training year that they have a history of self-harm or history of BPD, and they've had DBT treatment. And I admire that immensely, but I don't know if I'm the average person in my way of kind of seeing the world and acceptance of people. So I don't know if every other supervisor or training director would have as similar and accepting position. And I'm not trying to tout myself. I just feel a little anxious. I don't want to promote it, over promote it and have it backfire on people.
Thank you for being honest. about that and transparent. Yeah. It's such an interesting debate, and I'm sure we could go on and on about it, as I probably could on every single question I've asked you. But let's okay, DBT. You start reading about all this work, and then you somehow become, the one of the people who adapts it to adolescents. And you were one of the lead investigators of the first randomized trial of DBT that happened in Norway.
Mm-hmm.
How the heck did that happen?
When you hit something, you're like, oh my God, this is so the right thing for the right population. It seems so right. Like, in your bones, this is it. And it's like, are we the only people who know this? How is this possible? Jill Rathis and I just was mind blown. We met Marcia. We got trained by her because someone said, let's see if this fits. And we looked into it, like, maybe it can work. We brought it back to the Bronx. We started piloting with adolescents and families at Montefiore Medical Center, Black, Latinx teens and families. They were eating it up. They were loving it. And at the same time, we were kind of getting feedback from them, modifying Marcia's materials to make it more adolescent friendly. And, we just knew we had to add some new skills, which we can talk about later. But but the heart of the treatment, this acceptance and change, validation, skills training, and putting teens and parents in a multi-family group, learning all together, it just felt so right. So it felt so right. And I, some people can sell things and go out and talk about things they're not passionate about and be compelling. I cannot do that. If I'm not excited, do not roll me out. But if I am excited, I have a lot to say about it, as you can tell. And I knew it was right. The pilot data that Jill and I collected seemed really promising. And then I got invited to go to Oslo, Norway. By the way, we tried to run some studies through the NIH. We put some grant proposals together. They got rejected because they didn't want to believe that adolescents could have borderline personality symptoms or disorder.
Wow.
Which is an interesting whole other debate. Can you diagnose someone before their 18th birthday with BPD? And we wanted to kind of translate that from the adult Linehan version. And so we used BPD and suicidality and self-harm. And they weren't big fans of self-harm at that time. They weren't big fans of using a diagnosis of a personality disorder before their 18th birthday. So I had to go with depression and suicide, and I had to change my whole direction. Well, not the whole direction, but I had to be a little, conform to the NIH's wish. We didn't get funded, despite multiple submissions. So a colleague in Oslo named Lars Mellem, who's a child psychiatrist and a brilliant guy, I had the good fortune of meeting him. He invited me out. I gave a talk. He then said, let's do a study. I was a co-investigator on that first study where we trained Norwegian therapists in DBT and compared it to enhanced usual care. What was that?
Yeah.
Psychodynamic and CBT. That's what they were using at that time. And DBT was found to be the better treatment.
Wow.
In that study. And then it was replicated in UCLA and University of Washington as a second outcome study, making it the single leading treatment for suicidal adolescents, the one and only evidence-based treatment. We finally got it, an evidence-based treatment for suicidal adolescents. So I feel so grateful that people were open to it and people funded it, and we were able to then study it and then disseminate it, as you said, and get out there and talk to people about it.
Alec, it's just, it's incredible. It's crazy to think that, out of a decision that you may have made, almost like not knowing if it would lead to anything, you started exploring this and now it's saving lives. Like it's mind boggling.
I appreciate that. It feels still to this day a little mind boggling when I reflect upon it, and I do believe in the serendipity of life and just the stars aligning in certain ways that allowed Jill and I to pair up and then go get Linehan trained and collaborate with her on our treatment manual. And she was open to it and thought it was a great idea to work with adolescents. So, a lot of people were involved along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So now, I mean, you were working in the hospital setting at Montefiore, but eventually you decided to open up your own private practice along with a colleague. Um, Many people were wondering how you transitioned into private practice and why.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I love my hospital-based work. I both did clinical work. I was doing some research. I had administrative roles and different titles and responsibilities, and it was very gratifying. The pay was not wonderful in the hospital for all the work that went into it. And I get it. There's a lot of reasons for that. So, and my father was a private practitioner. I knew that I could make, some extra money starting, seeing some private patients on the side. So I started just seeing a few patients on the side on a Saturday morning,
Mm.
and then I, I enjoyed doing that, and I still enjoyed the hospital. Then my colleague, Lotta again, she and I put our heads together because we were kind of like-minded, evidence-based practitioners. She was a CBT guru, and I was now getting into DBT, and I love CBT as well. And we said, what if we have our own little group practice, the two of us, and let's just do that on the side. And she had a different job elsewhere. I still was at Montefiore. And then as the years were going by, we just had one postdoc join us because there was referral overflow. And I'm like, I don't know, I can't treat you, and this is a specialized treatment. So let's bring on a postdoc, and then maybe let's bring two postdocs. And then they became a staff psychologist, and then we had one person, two persons. So it started growing. That after about 10 years of trying to, and again, it wasn't like this strategic plan. Again,
Yeah.
like, let's just do this huge thing. It kind of evolved, just one and then two and then three. And we love the teamwork. And I'm a big fan of working on teams, whether it be a
Yeah.
sports team, a musical team, or a psychology team. I love teamwork. I love iterative processes. I love learning from each other. I love growing. I love the team spirit. So it took on a life of its own. And we, started saying, you know what, not only do we like evidence-based treatments, but we're both big believers in training the next generation of therapists.
Mm-hmm.
So let's continue to have postdocs, but maybe then we'll eventually have externs who are third or fourth year doctoral students. And you know what, maybe we'll throw in some internship as well. And so we love training. And then we love disseminating. So about 10 years into it, a colleague of mine said, actually, not 10 years into it. In 2007, which was 4 years into our group practice, someone said, can you take this evidence-based DBT thing and put it in schools? Sure, let's try that. So we now are modifying DBT for school settings, which I can talk about. But my point being, cognitive behavioral consultants now had a school arm of things. And a lot of our people are like, oh, this is fun. This is interesting. So when you talk about careers in psychology, guys, there's so many different hats you can wear.
Mm-hmm.
Therapist, supervisor, trainer, consultant to schools, also businesses now we consult to, right? You can evolve. And so why I did it was just for a little extra side hustle. And then it became a huge passion project to be able to kind of have a lot of the same benefits of a teaching hospital,
right,
without the overarching bureaucracy and oversight organizations of OMH and JCO. No offense to them, but we just were able to do it our way. And now we have a big operation in White Plains and Manhattan that has been very rewarding for the last 18 years now. It's 18 years we've done it.
Wild. Again, it's crazy. Some people try to build what you've built like intentionally, but aren't able to. And look at you. I mean, you've been able to build CBC, which has multiple arms. It's endless. The amount that you've contributed to the field and the scene of clinical psychology in New York. And I mean, yes, you weren't, you were trying. It's not that you weren't trying, but it's just crazy that
I'm lucky. There's a lot of luck involved. I'll agree. I work hard, but there was definitely a lot of luck. And as I saw opportunities, I did seize them. But your point is well taken. It wasn't like this master strategic plan that this is where I want to be in 15 years. Because I didn't have that. I didn't have that. Yeah.
while we're on this private practice thing, somebody asked, what advice can you offer to those who are interested in starting their own private practice? We'll start with that. And then there's a little extra question at the end.
So what is my advice to people who want to start their
Yes.
own practice?
Yeah. Or who
Yeah.
want to start it in the future.
Yeah, it's a great question. I give a talk to the Montefiore interns each year on professional development, on starting a practice, whether it be an individual solo practitioner practice or a group practice. And there's pros and cons to both. I think what to tie into this last point I just made about doing Montefiore and then doing CBC superimposed and having overlap gave me the financial security to kind of start small, see how I like it, and not rush into full-time practice. That would have been very, for me, anxiety provoking. And so I did leave Montefiore, 6 years ago after this other thing grew. In terms of recommendations for starting your practice, you have to decide, do you really want to work very independently, or do you want to have some collaborators? If you want to do private practice, there's opportunities to make some more money in some ways, but it's more kind of isolated, less interactive. And as I've said earlier, I like working with people and learning from each other. You can still do that. You can have a peer supervision group. There's other ways of doing it. Think about where you want to do it. Like, where do you want to locate yourself? What is your specialty? How, can you market yourself with a good website and good power lunches with people who are good referral sources? But you need to, in this day and age, you almost have to brand yourself a little bit and say, here's my niche. I'm really good with geriatric depression. I'm really good with pediatric anxiety, especially selective mutism. Oh, selective mutism. Oh, Maya does that. I'm going to refer this. I didn't know that. I don't know what to do with that. So as opposed to a generalist.
Right. Even though when you go to CBC's website and you look at the disorders that you guys, you have so many clinicians working at the practice now that you're able to, expand and have this breadth.
That's right. And not everyone does everything. We have some people who work really well with addictions and other people who work really well with, like I said, somebody who's a specialist in selective mutism, somebody who specializes in trauma. And it's not to say we do trauma all day long. If that's, they have some versatility, but I think having a subspecialty, I think helps.
Yeah.
Especially for private practitioners.
Thank you. That's a great point. It's something I've heard other clinicians say as well. And so it's just reiterating that that's probably important.
Yes.
So thank you.
But the trade-off is, right, that if everyone thinks of Alec as a suicidologist and so works with adolescent suicide all day, and that's the only way to think of me, then I could have a very narrow banded and less diverse patient practice, which I think that's the risk. So, it's a blessing and a curse to be having that reputation, because I still miss my panic patients. I want panic patients too. I don't get as many of those referrals now.
Yeah. I just listened to a podcast episode. I listened to it several months ago, but I revisited it as I was preparing for today, that you did with Molly Carmel, yes. And her podcast is called, oh my God, something about craving.
Yes.
I forget the name right now, but if you look it up, you'll find it. And you were saying, there was just a little story that I loved. And you were talking about how when you did your first grand rounds at Montefiore about panic disorders, you were sort of just sweating and hyperventilating. And you got up there and instead of, going about your presentation, you said, take it away.
It was my first grand rounds. It happened to be at St. Vincent's Hospital at the time. And they said, and I was talking about CBT for a panic disorder. And I said, let me run through the symptoms for you. And I'll tell you, because I'm experiencing them right now: heart palpitations, sweating, lightheadedness, and so, and by doing that, it actually helped reduce my anxiety and some comic relief for all parties. Yeah.
I loved that. That was a little off topic, but I love that story.
Yeah.
Somebody asked if there are internship opportunities where you work.
Yeah, good question. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, your dear friend Joy, that's how we met actually, started as a research assistant / she was, really a research assistant We also have, and she was part-time throughout the year. We also have college summer internships, which we are actually accepting applications right now. I think there may be room. I have to check with Danielle Francois, who is our director of the summer college internship at CBC. And basically it allows you opportunities to get exposed to DBT team meetings, CBT group discussions, our parent-child interaction therapy, where you can sit in and watch the therapist work with the parents with the young 3 and 4-year-olds and doing active interventions with them. We have a research arm of things. We have school consulting. So we've had last several summers a really booming college summer internship. So please feel free to reach out to Danielle Francois at CBC if you want to get more information on that.
Thank you so much. There are so many resources. I mean, besides internships, CBC offers so many resources for clinicians in training. And I think it's amazing.
Let me add one more thing to that, Mike.
Please do.
I forgot about my dear friend, Dr. Rachel Bussman, who runs the Child and Adolescent Anxiety and Related Disorders programs. And she's one of the people who specializes in selective mutism. 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds who go into public spaces and they cannot speak to a teacher or a stranger. So she runs some intensive programs and some outpatient programs. She loves college students who want to get some more experience, and she'll train you up on how to, join her in some of the groups with these youngsters. So if again, and there's during the year as well as summer intensive programs too. So Dr. Rachel Bussman at CBC is someone who also is happy to have people join her and do some interventions that way as well.
Wonderful. So awesome. Thank you, Alec.
Sure.
We have so many questions that it's difficult to balance all the, looking back and forth.
Maya, you need an assistant to assist with all of these questions.
We have so many. So honestly, I'm just going to start asking them, and they might, be jumping back to things we've covered already, or, topics that we've covered already, but maybe not the question, or it may be something new entirely. So I'm just going to go ahead and start asking people's questions. The first one is, what does Dr. Miller look for when bringing in interns and postdocs at CBC? And do we need APIC, which is the program for internships? Right. Anyway, yes.
So we don't need APIC. So don't worry about that. What we look for are people with diverse range of training experiences. We look for people who like to work hard and play hard, because not only do we work hard, we have our Friday monthly staff meeting happy hours, and then we do, give community gives backs to Westchester and New York, where we help the community, then we play kickball, and then we go do fun things. So we are a team that works hard and plays hard, and people want to do that. We want people who are on a continual path of learning and also being fallible. We're big fans of the fallibility agreement, Maya. So we all have to acknowledge we're going to make mistakes sometimes. And when we do, we just honor that, learn from it, and move on, as opposed to concealing it and not learning from it and not moving on. We're big believers in acceptance and tolerance and inclusion and equity and diversity. And we are working on increasing diversity among our workforce. And we haven't mentioned this yet, but we're also starting a nonprofit foundation.
You beat me to it. Sorry. Yes, continue.
We're starting a nonprofit foundation called Access Psychology Foundation, because my business partner Lotta and I decided several years ago, and we finally brought it to fruition, that we're going to launch a resource, a foundation to help reduce the disparities in mental health care and increase access to evidence-based treatments and education and so on. So not only do we want to help patients who are racially diverse and underserved, we want to also increase therapists of color. And we're going to give scholarships and stipends to racially diverse therapists. We're going to go into underserved school districts and provide education to them. So it's been a passion project for the last 3 months. I'm so excited. We're going to launch this baby in January. We're going to get the website going, and we already have a board established and committees, and we're cooking. And so for college students and graduate students and even early career folks, if you want to serve as ambassadors on this committee on this foundation, feel free to send me an email at amiller@cbc-psychology.com.
I'm going to put that in the chat.
Yeah.
A Miller at
cbc
dot
psychology.com. Yeah. I have to get my other email for the foundation soon. That's coming soon. Yeah.
Sounds good. So this is really incredible work. You and I are going to do a separate sort of episode just on the nonprofit, because you and I have a lot of shared goals when it comes to access to information and to opportunities in the field. And I love this idea. I love it. I can't wait to see it come to fruition. And for the people who want to get involved, that information will be coming shortly.
Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome.
But did I answer your question? I got so excited about the foundation. Did I even answer your initial question?
I think the question, oh man, what was the question? I think it was about
what you look for.
What do you guys look for in interns and postdocs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I
think you answered that. Yeah.
Okay, I got carried away. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's okay. I'm glad you covered the nonprofit. So it's called Access Psychology Foundation.
Yes. And the website hopefully will be launched in about a month. Yeah.
Awesome.
So people can get access to the information.
Yeah. So, moving on to the next question. We discussed in the beginning about like burnout and building stamina as a clinician. Somebody asked, should that stamina be built as you begin working or as you study? I'm concerned about being too invested in my patient's problems, but really do want to pursue this work.
I think you want to cultivate a way of self-managing right out of the gate, right now, whatever stage of life you're in, whether you be college or graduate school or post-grad. I'm a big believer in having some balance. And yes, I do work hard, and sometimes, it ebbs and flows where I get a little imbalanced. But I remember when my kids, after my young kids were born and they were about 3 and 1, I said to my wife that I'm feeling imbalanced because I'd work at Montefiore, then I'd have my group practice, then I come home and change some diapers, and then I do that again. And I said, there's something that's missing. I want to get music back into my life. So I made sure to find some like-minded musicians and got my musical side hustle going, where I play in rock bands and so on. And I've still been doing that. Then there's, athletically, I felt a little stifled. And so I started working out again, or doing a little yoga, or playing some tennis, or whatever it is that suits you. But I think you have to make sure to schedule and protect self-care time. And that might be reading, it might be watching movies, it might be doing art, it might be listening to other people's music. But I just want to encourage everyone, it's not entitlement, it's not pampering yourself, it's really caring for yourself as a human being, that you deserve it. And at the same time allows you to be a better, healthier caregiver to those who need your support. Because if you get depleted and you can't kind of have the stamina to kind of, do the work that's necessary, you're not helping your patients either. By being, working so hard is not going to be good for them. So it's this fine line of, and I think it's a growth edge for many young professionals who feel like, I got to build my resume, I have to keep doing all this and that, I have to be competitive. Yes, those things are true. And I also ask people in interviews, what do you like to do for fun? What are your outlets? Because I really want to see, are people literally one-trick ponies? I just work and I just build my resume, or I like working with patients, and I like seeing my friends. Yeah. And I like doing these other things, going for hikes or whatever it is, Yeah. So I really want to plug that for you guys, and taking care of yourselves. I just relatedly, there was a suicide at a high school in Westchester County, and I was called in to consult to the teachers and the mental health team. And the first day was talking about how to manage the students and the parents and the community, right? But then the second day was all about how they're going to take care of themselves. And admittedly, right, understandably, in the face of a crisis, it's hard to do that. But as you're coming out of the crisis, they need to do it. And I gave them a whole host of tips, and, spent some time really working, using a lot of DBT principles and skills to do some better self-care for them. And they was really needed. I think they appreciated it, but we don't have to wait for a crisis to do good quality self-care.
It's something clinicians, I feel like, talk about all the time, but and I've heard clinicians say, like, you know, there's all this buzz about self-care, but how many of us actually take it seriously? Like, how many of us actually schedule that time for ourselves to be able to actually go back and practice and give back to our patients in the way that we need to? The answer is maybe not many. Actually take it that seriously.
I'm afraid. Sadly, I agree. I agree with you. I agree.
Because I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense. Like, who are clinicians? You know, they're people who care deeply about giving and helping and listening. And so it can be hard to center yourself.
And you're right. It's not just even to give back to our patients, but give back to our loved ones, like to my wife and to my own kids, that I don't want to be so depleted. They come home from high school or college and they're talking to me and I'm just so wiped out. I don't have bandwidth to even hear them or their problem of the day, because I'm like, oh, I don't have time. I don't have any energy to hear your life problem either. That's not what I want to be.
This is something I've been thinking about a lot as I sort of consider whether a clinical path will be right for me. It's something a question that I get a lot from my audience members. Is there anything you do when you leave work and you've had, let's say, a full caseload, you've just been swamped with difficult cases? Is there anything you do before you leave work or right after you leave work to be able to switch off, go home to your family, and, you know, and be a human outside of the therapy room?
There's a few things that I think I do. I don't know how much are strategic anymore, just now intuitive. One is literally just having some time between my last appointment, my last appointment and the time I see my family. So if it's a half hour, an hour, just to kind of unwind and to kind of, in a sense, refocus on the present. And that comes into mindfulness practice, right? It's, in other words, I was really mindfully engaged with my client and focused on their problems and doing what I do. Then I walk to my car and then I drive home and I, listen to music where I'm bringing my attention to the present moment. And those are muscles. Mindfulness muscles have to be built. I've been practicing mindfulness for 30 years. So I've gotten better at focusing my attention. And when my mind wanders back to Melissa, my last patient, I can say, oh, Alec, your mind is wandering. Maybe we can, if there's an issue with that, I'll come back to it later. But right now I'm talking to my daughter, so I'm going to focus on her. So I can catch my drift. I can notice my mind wandering and bring it back. So that's part of it. And I think just sheer experience of trusting in the human spirit and human resilience. And there are a lot of people who have a lot of life problems and we worry about them. But I also, in my heart of heart, know they know how to access me after hours if they were really in crisis, or they have other avenues to get support if between now and next session they need it. So it kind of quells my anxiety. I believe in the human spirit. I know they have resources, and I will continue my work with them next week, even if they're still in some distress. So there's kind of like some self-talk that helps me as well. So mindfulness, self-talk, time, and participating in the present moment. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious about your reasons for doing this work and whether they have changed since you decided to become a psychologist.
That's a good question. I don't think I've never been happier and more proud to be a psychologist. I mean, it is such gratifying work. It's hard work, and running a large group practice is hard work. But at the end of the day, if we can change lives and, as you said, save lives, there's nothing more rewarding than that. And why I love young people and working with teens and even young adults too, it's like I really feel like we can have an impact to change their trajectory. And if they're really struggling, to give them the resources to get them back on track, whether it be in school, kids, or outpatient therapy. And not, because once once you get really knocked off track and it takes a long time to recover, you lose those years. I mean, this pandemic, people have lost social time, academic time, emotional development time. And same is true if you're suffering from a severe mental illness. That all gets impacted where your developmental trajectory is stifled. And so the sooner we can kind of get resources to them and get them back on whatever track that is, whatever they want. I'm not saying there's one track, but their track toward their goals, then there's nothing more gratifying than that to me. And then to have the reach of doing this in school, large numbers of schools now where we can impact classrooms and now this foundation, I'm so pleased to be a psychologist, to be able, and at this stage of my life, to be able to choose where I want to put my attention. But at the end of the day, I love seeing patients too. I love all these other things, these different hats that I take on, but patient care is still, tonight I have my multi-family group in DBT with 5 families coming in, and I love it. I love it.
You do so many different things, and that's a big, that's something that's really appealing to me about this work. And you mentioned it in the beginning. Getting your doctorate in clinical psychology allows you to do more than just be a therapist, which is gratifying. And if that's all you want to do, that's right. Incredible work. But you've taken on so many other responsibilities, and actually, there's something I have been really interested in. You have been able to take the work that you do and speak about it to people all over the world, and you've really become an expert in what you do. How did you do that, I guess, is my question. Like, how did you become someone that people call upon to be like, can you fly to, like, I don't know, Australia and give us a talk about DBT? Like, how did that happen for you?
I think being in an academic medical center like Montefiore Albert Einstein College of Medicine, where we really developed adolescent DBT, right? That's where it started. It was born there and it grew up there. And now it's 25, 26 years later, right? So having that clinical research specialization, then writing about it, I think writing articles or book chapters or textbooks on it, where you're now seen as first or second author and the expert in X. And given the prevalence of this problem worldwide, people are like desperate to learn how to help these adolescent, suicidal, self-injurious, multi-problem youth. So it kind of, again, Mr. Lucky over here, having kind of developed this treatment in the Bronx, writing about it, researching it, and being then identified as an expert in it, on the kind of the leading edge of it. Again, I feel so lucky. Again, the serendipity of all those things I said earlier allowed me to be invited to tell other people what we're doing in the Bronx and what they can do in Australia and Italy and Germany and so on. So, that's really how it is. And I think there are a lot of people who develop other specialties who can do that. Now, you don't have to be the treatment developer to be invited. If you have a resume where you grow and develop your career to be an author on adapting other people's treatments and doing other things, where you have a special niche, you can definitely be invited to do a lot of talks at conferences and then on special events in other places. So that's another just incredible aspect of my career that I've so enjoyed. I love to travel. Yeah. I love to meet people from different cultures, and I just feel so blessed to have had that opportunity over this time.
I'm not going to ask about this now, but the cultural piece too is really interesting to me, and I know to a lot of psych students who are looking to practice clinically is like, how can we make this also more culturally competent is the buzzword, but are these treatments applicable in other countries too? This is a whole nother discussion that we won't get into today. I'm sure we could spend some time on that, but I do want to move to a question that I just received, but I received a few versions of it prior, so I want to make sure we get to it, and that is about the future of the field for clinicians. This person specifically asked, what do you think the future of clinical practice looks like for licensed doctoral level psychologists? They added, given that therapy is being performed more and more by master's level clinicians.
Mm-hmm. I think there's always going to be room for doctoral level psychologists, even if there are more master's level therapists in the field. I think the master's level therapists will often need more supervision and training and guidance, and maybe the doctoral level people might be more in positions of program development and research and supervision. But I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. The fact of the matter is, we are in the midst of a mental health tsunami where 25% of young people and women and the general global population are experiencing more anxiety and depression. And this pandemic has just wreaked havoc, and we're going to be dealing with the sequelae of this for years to come. So I cannot find a single therapist that I know to refer patients to. We get a bunch of calls every day, and everybody's busy. Everyone's busy. And I don't think this is going away anytime soon. So I imagine for the next many, many years, there'll be plenty of opportunity for anybody interested in master's or doctoral level therapists to join the ranks and help put out and deal with many of these clinical fires that we're all dealing with, because there's so much need and not enough, believe it, not enough resources. It is. So do I feel the field is moving in a direction that will wipe out doctoral level programs? I don't see any sign of that. I have no indication of that whatsoever. And I think, plenty of people want to have good quality care, and hospitals and clinical settings do. Yeah, there'll be more master's level therapists, but the doctoral level people will still be there. Telehealth. Right now, my team has the option of working half-time virtually and half-time in the office. And a lot of patients are preferring to stay virtual, both for health and safety reasons, as well as convenience. If you think about it, right, we're in White Plains. If we have a patient coming from another part of Westchester County or Connecticut, and it takes them an hour to get there, 45-minute session, hour to get back, or just zoom in from, wherever. It's kind of nice. And I think for older people, adults and young adults, that's suitable. For younger people, patients who are 8, 10, 12 with disruptive behavior disorders, and they're popping off the screen and they're shutting down the laptop, harder to do good treatment.
Yeah.
Way. But I have older patients, adults too, and young adults who are like, Alec, I still want to be in the office some of the time. And so the interesting thing is, how do we sometimes have some face-to-face time in the office, and other times do it virtually, kind of keeping that connection, a 3D version showing up.
Right. It's so interesting. And I'm sure there will be so much research that comes out of this that will help us better understand, what the implications are of doing therapy virtually. So it'll be interesting to look out for that.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm not sure if CBC is doing any research on that, but
we are part of a multi-center trial specifically looking at DBT program and DBT groups pre and during and post-pandemic. So we are participating in a multi-center, multinational trial with Australia and New Zealand, I think, and there was some programs on the West Coast. So we'll have a study. But there's a lot that can be done, Maya, as you said, for sure.
Yeah. I have a million more questions for you, but we are almost out of time. There's one question that I always ask my guests at the end, so I'll go ahead and ask that. But then I want to open it up to you if there's anything else that I haven't touched on yet. I'm sure we could go on forever, but to add anything that you would like. So my last question is, what is one skill, quality, or general factor, it does not have to be intrinsic, that has served you no matter where you went in life?
Easy manner. I think having an easy manner, we teach this in the DBT give skills: be gentle, act interested, validate, and use an easy manner. Relationally, I think has helped me a lot with patients and colleagues and bosses and students. And so that for me is relatively intrinsic. I kind of, things roll off my back relatively easily. I can be playful and humorous and sarcastic and kind of just smile and enjoy life. And I think that has other people feel comfortable and easier to connect with. And so for me personally, I feel like that happens to be one of my assets, is having more of an easy manner, I've been told, and kind of down to earth way of communicating, I've been told. So that I think helps me personally and in clinical settings as well, and teaching, I think, too.
Thank you so much. Is there anything that you'd want to add at the end that I haven't asked you yet?
Maya, you have a very easy manner, I must say, and it's so easy to talk with you and make, I mean, it's just, like you said, I really have found this so easy to chat. I do a lot of different interviews and stuff, but you make it so easy. You seem well prepared and poised and just going with the flow. So I want to give you a shout out for being such a fabulous moderator and interviewer. Made it easy for me. No, I think you covered a lot of ground, and I know we'll get together again sometime soon for some other content. So I'm excited about the next time we meet as well.
Me too. I just want to say, well, thank you so much for being so honest and open and talking to us about your experience, but also offering like really practical advice for my audience and for your audience as well. I also want to say thank you to everybody who participated today and all those who sent in questions, but also just listened in. There are so many questions that we did not get to. I have those in mind for ways to, in the future, address those questions in other ways, such as in the Psych Mike newsletter, which if you're not signed up, you should sign up at www.psychmike.com. You just enter your email and you'll receive lots and lots of resources as it relates to career development, applying to grad school, finding research opportunities, internships, and learning from amazing people just like Alec. So I encourage you to sign up for the newsletter so you can stay updated. Alec, you and I will meet again. We will be collaborating. I cannot wait. Thank you, whoever sent that. Yes, please go sign up for the newsletter. All right, so this recording will be available in the next couple weeks. And so thank you, everybody, again. Alec, thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Such a wonderful time.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Maya. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.